Hey guys, in today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about PD pump best practices and specifically things you should do with your PD pump and things you should definitely not do with your PD pump. We'll talk a little bit about why we see them, common reasons for failure, etc. So let's get started. This was actually a slide that we did in an end user training. They were having frequent recurrent breakdowns of their Waukesha Universal 2 pumps. And most of it was not really pump related. It had a lot more to do with how they decided to implement the pumps, set the pumps up, and then once they started following these pretty simple rules, the maintenance guys' lives got a lot easier. The pump lives started lasting a whole lot longer. Repairs were far less infrequent, and they didn't have to spend as much money on spare parts. So real quick, we'll start with the do's. All right. So when we are looking at a new PD pump setup, we want to use long, straight inlet runs. That's going to be an important thing. A lot of times we like to look at pipe diameters. When we do that, we say we want 5 or 10 pipe diameters of straight length into the pump. The biggest thing, though, is we just want to avoid sharp turns or curves. We want a nice, smooth, laminar flow whenever possible coming into the pump. The other thing we want to always make sure of is that the inlet valves to the pump are open. The pumps can't pump what's not there. So if the inlet valve is not open, nothing can go to the pump. Obviously, it's not going to pump. In addition to that, we worry a lot about mechanical seal life. Especially if we're not using a flush with a double seal, we cannot run these pumps dry. Whether you're running a single O-ring in a Universal 1 or a single mechanical seal in a Universal 2, if we don't have a lubricating fluid there, you're going to see a lot of heat buildup when you run dry, and eventually that seal will fail prematurely. All right. The other thing we want to do is we want to keep things out of the pump that we don't want in there. And one of the best ways to do this is to use an inlet strainer. An important thing here is that you don't want to use anything too fine, right? Our going into the pump, it's not to filter out the product, it's to protect the pump. So we want to use things with like a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch perforation, something nice and wide to allow plenty of flow in, but we'll also keep things like nuts and bolts that could potentially damage the pump out. We want to listen for noise-free operation, okay? When these things are running right, when a Waukesha pump is running right, you're not going to hear a lot of slamming, knocking, or cavitating. And you also want to listen to that motor. You want to hear that nice kind of harmonic 3-phase motor hum, okay? If you are using a double seal, you want to make sure that the seal flush is connected and flowing to the seals. If you don't have that seal flush on a double seal, whether it's double O-ring or double mechanical, that's a lot like running a single seal dry, and we don't want to do that. That is one of the most common means of failure. All right. One of the other things we will look at from time to time in certain applications, especially with super aggressive chemicals, is bearing isolators, especially if this is like a meat plant where we're going to have a lot of direct spray into the gear case. The number one place where our pump repair shop sees failure in these Waukesha pumps is in the gear case, and more times than not, it's because water has ingressed into the gear case. Waukesha offers something called a bearing isolator, which goes a little bit above and beyond their standard bearing retainer. And it does a really great job of keeping both product and condensate water out of the gear case and extending bearing and pump life. Another best practice is just to use inlet and discharge pressure gauges. Generally, anytime you have a problem, you call a distributor or manufacturer for help. They're going to ask you what's your inlet pressure and what's your discharge pressure. Those are two of the most important variables we have that we can kind of figure out what's going on or validate what we think might be going on. The next thing we want to do, especially with PD pumps, is use pressure relief or bypass valves. Okay, a PD pump is by definition going to pump until something explodes, regardless of downstream pressure head. Right? More times than not, that's the pump. That's where we start seeing shaft deflection, which decreases bearing life, snap shafts, blown clamps, things like that. It can create potentially dangerous or hazardous situations, and the best and easiest way to prevent that is to use a pressure relief valve set quite above in excess of what your standard running pressure is. We don't want to use this pressure relief valve as a regular sort of vent valve or something like that, or like a bleed valve. That's not the point of these. These are to crack in emergency failure situations when a valve gets closed downstream, there's a blockage in the line, something like that. The other thing we want to do, especially if this is a product that coats out or tends to deplete, we want to make sure we clean it after shutdown. Okay, and that's again a pretty standard type procedure that most people implement. But the most common time we see pump failure, especially when people are handling really abrasive stuff or products that really are really sticky or coat up, will be on Monday mornings, right? So they ran Friday, maybe they were in a hurry to get out of there. They didn't do a great job of cleaning the pump, and it just sat over the weekend. Maybe it's a colder plant in Chicago winter. Product sets up on the seals faces. Next thing you know, you go to start Monday morning, and those seal faces are stuck together, and you crack a seal face. All right, so those are our do's. Now let's look at our do nots. And a lot of our do nots are sort of the inverse of our do's. Okay, so we don't want to run pumps dry. Waukesha PD pumps are not designed to be run dry. We won't want to do it. Nothing good will come out of it. We also don't want to deadhead pumps. As we mentioned before, deadheading pumps are going to create high discharge pressures in excess of 200 or 300 psi, which a lot of the universal 2s are rated at, and we do not want to do that. Okay. The other thing we don't want to do is we don't want to run at excessive motor temperatures. Okay, so if you start seeing, and we'll do this a lot, we have what's called our pump health assessment tool or health assessment toolkit, which will have like an infrared thermometer. We've seen motor temperatures that are, a lot of times it's because people are running the pumps so slow that that you could literally fry an egg on them. I mean, you're talking about 200 degrees. These things, a three-phase motor, when properly applied, it may be warm to the touch, but it should not be too hot to touch. If it is too hot to touch, something is wrong. You may want to consider, look at your discharge pressure gauge. See if there's a downstream line blockage. Are you running it too slow? Is the motor not rated for that high of turn down? Okay. So we definitely want to watch those motor temperatures. If you're not getting enough flow, do not continue to increase the speed, okay? That's another thing where, especially like production guys who are under a deadline to move a batch, they have to get the batch done in an hour before the end of the shift. If they're not getting the flow that they expect, or they're not getting enough flow, they'll just increase that speed. And a lot of times this is going to mask a bigger problem. Maybe it's a blockage down line. You're going to increase your discharge pressure by doing that. Maybe you have too much slip through the pump. Maybe you need new rotors, okay? So if you're having to find yourself consistently overspeeding the pump, we want to take a minute, step back, and review what's going on. We don't want to run double seals without a flush. This, again, is a lot like running a pump dry. You don't want to run a single O-ring or a single mechanical without product in it. You don't want to run a double O-ring or a double mechanical without flush. It's going to create a lot of heat, a lot of friction, which will lead to seal failure. And finally, we don't want to allow any foreign objects into the pump. This goes without saying, but these pumps have a pair of rotating pistons, essentially, that are usually moving at 300 or 400 RPM. That's very fast, and they're going to take a bolt and they're going to send it right through. And that's not going to be good for the pump or anything downstream of that. We want to make sure we keep our hands and our fingers away from the pumps when they're running. I would think that goes without saying, but you'd be shocked how long or how often we get people calling and asking for port extensions on their pumps. Anytime we see somebody calling for a port extension, we know what happened, okay? So these are our best practices, our do's and do nots for Waukesha PD pumps. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to contact us at Triplex Sales. We'd be happy to help you out in any way that we can. Hope everyone had a great holiday, Happy New Year, and we look forward to making more videos for you this year. Take care.